Oh, wait, did you go?
Yeah, I hit record. This
Oh,
meeting is
okay.
being
This
recorded.
meeting is being recorded for your benefit, ladies and
Welcome
gentlemen.
back to another edition, episode number 11 of Virginia is for Conspiracy Lovers. I got the title right that
We
time.
made it past 10.
Yeah, yeah,
Whoa,
we did.
that's cool.
Dude, and we have a Romanian listener now.
What?
Yeah,
So we're international
yeah,
officially, or we were international
Romanian.
with our Canadian
We
listener,
have
but
Dracula listening.
we're intercontinental.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we got Romanians, Australians, Germans, I think Austria.
Austria, huh?
Yeah, it's like one person from each of those.
That's fun.
Australia is like
It
eight people.
constitutes an international
Oh,
audience. And
100%.
why am I not surprised that
A regional
there's more
conspiracy
Australians?
theory show. I, that's what interests the crap out of me is what
You
is the
know,
guy in
you
Romania
know what I
interested in?
picture when you talk about, no offense to our Australian listeners, but do you remember that like famous interview of the Australian guy? It's like the best TV interview ever, where they interviewed the kid that got the cop showed up because he was having a party at his house while his parents were out of town. And he's like what you would expect of like a stoner surfer party teenager.
No,
And
I
he's
haven't seen it. I have to
I
look
mean,
it up
his
now.
accent and just the way he's just like, yeah, we was like partying, and he's got his shades still on. That's what I picture our listeners looking like
I
that are
hope
into
it is.
conspiracy
I
theories in
hope it is.
Australia.
Um, yeah, Daniel's back
I'm in the same room.
in
Hi,
the
y'all. No
same
deer, no
room.
antlers.
Wifey's foot is starting to heal up. She's a little bit more
She's better.
mobile now.
She's more mobile, and things are stabilizing. So
That's good. You missed last week. I talked to Dan. That was more of similar stuff, but we got a little bit more into the stuff I think you actually wanted to hear about, which was
yeah, when I had to jump off that last
mhm.
time, yeah,
But that was good. And we'll probably have Dan on again at some point because I mean both times after the after we quit recording, me and him talked for like another hour about just other he's interested in all this stuff like beyond just his
yeah, yeah.
kind of scope of research and his family. But
Maybe we should create a subcast called Off the Record, and
oh, that would be cool.
like you just let it roll after the official end of the episode, and it's like
I think we
for
should
our
have
extra subscribers, you get the unedited post show content
where we just curse a
conversations where
lot.
people say ridiculous things they were embarrassed to say on camera or on
Yeah.
audio,
I think we should have a like a special features cast where it's just me talking about how Court Lindahl is going to come on
Yeah, well,
soon.
there you go.
But guess what? He hit me up this week and was like, "I'm starting to feel well enough to do
On
this
the mend.
thing."
All
So
right.
yeah, he's feeling better, and we're happy about that. And I really want to talk to that guy because I'm still continuing my William and Mary research, and I recently found something wacky as hell. And I was going to invite you because you probably can't go. Um, but
That's the thought that counts.
but I'm taking the day off of work next next Friday, and I'm going to Williamsburg at like 4 a.m. because it's the summer solstice.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and there's
Well,
some
be safe
alignments.
out there.
There's some stuff I want to
What if you're sacrificed?
well, I'm not worried about that.
I may, we have
William and Mary law students.
I think we have a 3-day holiday next
Really?
weekend. Yeah, it could be, and I might have to look into that, see
I
if I
just
could
want
make
to.
a
I'm just
journey. I do think we should do like a guided tour with you in Williamsburg. Should
I
go
would do
down
that.
there and you can show people around and point out some of this stuff, and we can walk the campus and all that. Would you
Hold
quit
on,
playing with your microphone?
yeah, dude.
Well, don't mess with it. Anyway, while Ernie's fixing his equipment, he's having technical difficulties of his own manufacture. I wanted to tell a story about something that happened to me recently. Actually, it was a night we recorded a podcast. It was the last time I think I came here to record in the studio. And I got home and I poured myself a glass of wine and I walked out on the back porch and I saw these crazy
Linguli
lights.
blue for the best of times. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Go ahead.
no, sounds nice. I walked out on the back porch and I saw these wild lights coming across the sky going from west to east. and they were tracking like right over top of the house. And my first instinct was, of course, like, oh, I got to go back inside and get my phone and take a picture. Are you trying to whistle the
I'm trying.
Twilight, not
No,
the
I was
Twilight
trying to do
Zone,
the
what,
like.
X-Files? Oh, the
I got
whippoorwill.
nothing.
Oh, yeah, I
I've
can't
got
do it.
Copenhagen in my mouth. I can't do it.
Well, these lights are crazy looking. At first instinct, of course, is like, where's my camera? And I've usually got a camera pretty
Yeah,
close
you
to me
usually
at all
got
times,
12
or
cameras
several.
close by.
And then I thought for a second, I was like, wait a minute. And I'm watching them, and they're all moving in exactly a straight line. And it was like a string of beads in the sky, but occasionally some of them were kind of almost
String of
wiggling,
beads.
like like they would on a string if it was being
Yeah,
dragged across the floor. You know, you'd see some. And then I realized it was just Starlink
of course it was.
satellites.
Yeah, but I'm not
But it
convinced.
was wild to see. That was the first time I've ever seen it.
Yeah,
And this is in Petersburg, in town, with all the
yeah,
light
all the
pollution
lights.
from Colonial Heights across the river in the city, and it was still so bright that it was just wow. And to watch him track in a straight line like that and think about just the engineering that it required to do something like that to me was super, super weird.
I'm also not convinced that that's not conspiratorial or
I know.
weird. I mean, it's Elon Musk, and that guy is out of his mind. Did you
Yeah.
see his recent tweet?
No. I'm trying to stay away from the whole
Yeah, you should.
conflict that's
I
going
watch
on.
it like for it. I I check in here and there for like conspiratorial and entertainment purposes, but he made some tweet where he posted, and it was a callback to like a post from like a year ago or something like that, or maybe a couple years ago, and it was the exact same post. He just retweeted it, and it was like a photo. It was like a this like I think it was like an AI like art picture thing of like
Boo.
aliens and planets and
Mm,
stuff. And then his message was the same as like a couple years ago, and it just said, "Don't worry, no matter what, we have the ships," or something like that.
mm.
Dude, can you not? Because you are nuts and smart, and we're all worried about what you're doing in space.
He's also, I mean, to the point of being nuts, which apparently some people are just finding out is that he's on drugs all the time.
Yeah,
He's been
apparently.
doing that for
Yeah,
decades.
apparently
Like
he's like a ketamine, like
that, and he like microdoses MDMA and all
yeah.
kinds of stuff all day, and he works most of the time pretty high. That's how he stays awake so long. But you remember years ago, a couple years ago, not to get sidetracked on Elon Musk, but
We're already.
he during the Johnny Depp, Amanda, what's her face?
Yeah,
Is it Amanda? Whatever that girl's, Amber Heard,
Amber
that
Heard.
trial about that whole thing. Elon Musk was taunting Johnny Depp about having had a three-way with her and
Oh
somebody
yeah,
else
yeah,
on
yeah. I
ecstasy.
remember. Yeah.
I mean, he's always just kind of like, he was always throwing that kind of stuff out there. And now people are like shocked that he was working for the government on illicit drugs. Like, that's
Well,
not
it's
shocking.
right. You're right. He
He's been
didn't
telling
clean up.
people about all these parties
Yeah.
and things he does all the time. And it's like, what do you expect? And then whatever. Anyway. Well, Hannah's brother sent me a picture one night too, and he lives out in Dinwiddie. That Hannah's my wife, by the way. And he was like, "Oh my God, dude, I just saw a UFO." And he sends me the cell phone picture, and I was like, "God, it's Starlink satellites." This is like a year ago, maybe 2 years
And it
ago.
still fooled you
Well,
for a
that's
second.
why I hesitated for a second. I thought, "Oh, camera, weird lights," and I was like, "Oh no, wait a minute, that's what that is," because it's a straight line. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It's not a triangle. It's not a disc. It's not any of that stuff. No flashing. It just looks like satellites when you see them,
I've
but it's
never
in a
seen a
straight
satellite
line.
in the sky.
Oh, we see them all the time in my backyard.
I wouldn't know the day.
And the International Space Station. You can see that real bright going over at
I've
night.
got poor eyesight, and
Mm.
like I wouldn't recognize it.
Uh,
I stared at like a twinkling star thing when we lived in Dinwiddie for like 4 nights.
was it a twinkling star?
Yeah, no, it was like it was like a reddish color, and it looked weird, and I'd never
Well,
seen anything.
Venus is
Yeah, and
always on that
yeah, it turned
western
out it was
horizon out
Venus,
there. Yeah.
but I was convinced that it was moving a little bit,
Yeah.
but it wasn't.
Well, I think I told you the story about last year when I was in New Mexico with my friend Ryan, and we were camping in Kit Carson National Forest. above the Rio Grande on the top of the gorge, and not a lot of light out there. You can see a lot of stars, and there was this bright shining object on the horizon. And my friend Ryan was like, "Oh my God, dude, there's a UFO. We're close to Roswell. And all this stuff is, oh my God, it's a UFO." And I was like, "Dude, that thing is not moving at all." "Yes, it is. It's moving all over the place." And I was like, "Ryan, it's not moving. It's just, it's a star or something, in the distant horizon." "Yeah, you're right. My eyesight's not very good. My eyes are playing tricks on me," he said. So it's like, people see UFOs everywhere.
Some people do. We're gonna
Yeah,
get into some pretty weird ones in the state of Virginia.
that's what we're talking about today. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
UFOs, UFOs,
UAPs,
UAPs,
UFOs,
they're calling them
whatever
now.
designation
Well,
they
and now
are
what's
these
the
days.
other new one that they're using now? It's U UAVs as well. Like it's
Unidentified or
usual
what is it? You unidentified
unidentified
aerial
anomalous
vehicles,
vehicles.
anomalous vehicles.
Yeah, they've switched it to that because now there's all this stuff about these giant craft flying through the water at like 200 miles an hour
And we're gonna get into that
and
too,
things
because
coming in and out of the
at a
water.
certain point, I want us to talk about, well, obviously, one, if either of us believe in aliens, what we think these things may be, and what the possibilities of what some of these things could be. And it's kind of weird. Like we had decided to do an episode about UFOs in Virginia, like a month ago. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I mean, I guess here for the last few years, the whole UAP thing has been blowing up, but particularly around Virginia and stuff, it's really been uh getting weird here lately in the last like couple weeks and whatnot. So
Yeah.
anyway,
This is also where I wish we actually had an old-fashioned radio show instead
all
of a
right, so we can talk
podcast.
like that.
No, do you remember how cool would it be if we were still back in the time where, I don't know, we're on from 10 p.m. to midnight and it's like
Yeah.
if you've seen a UFO, call
Yeah, I
us
know.
at
I do want
we
to
have,
call
wouldn't
in
that be cool
line.
if we had call-in people?
We could do
Yeah,
that.
people calling in,
We
a
could do
call-in
that.
line. We're
Yeah, we
just
just
gonna answer
do.
our phone,
No, we do a lot. You do a there's
put the Zoom code out there and
no,
people
there's a we don't have to do it on Zoom. There's different apps that you can use for podcasting where you
really.
do a live podcast.
Hmm.
We can do it right on YouTube. I
Well,
think. I don't know.
well, then you
I
have
hear
people
people do
live
it who do
comment.
podcasts
But they
and
could
they don't
live
seem it.
comment. That's not as cool as the old-fashioned
Oh
call-in.
no, they can
Well,
call in. You can open it up to,
huh.
yeah, I
We're gonna
think.
have to look into that. I think that
Yeah.
would be
I
fun.
listened to Nephilim Death Squad
Nephilim Death Squad. Am
and
I a
they
part of
had
the Nephilim Death Squad?
no, I don't know, but they just did a really cool episode. I want those guys to like me because I really like their episode. Please listen to us, Nephilim Death Squad. They're they're about to have. They might have already had it, but they are they're doing a like a con like weekend down in Florida for conspiracies and stuff like that.
And
And
you're not going?
it's called I want to, but it's in Florida. I hate Florida, but it's called Bohemian Grove. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Bohemian Grove.
Yeah,
I
and
like that.
they like Sam Tripoli, whose show I have been on. Go find it. It's on Rockfin. Um, but he's like
Hmm.
conspiracy godfather. Anyway, let's get into it.
Well, let's talk
Virginia
about Virginia ones.
UFOs. Yeah, so we've got what's really interesting to me is you know, uh, like I love conspiracies. Like I said, I collect them like comic books, and I, I'm willing to entertain any and all conspiracies. But there's a handful that I hold near and dear to my heart. But UFOs, I think that it's intellectually it's too far over my head. I don't understand the physics. I don't understand the science. And I'm a nerd, but I'm not a nerd to that degree. And so it's never been really,
Well, what do you mean by that?
it just
Considering,
seems,
hey, if these are vehicles from another place,
yeah,
not man-made from Earth,
yeah.
part of the point is nobody understands the physics.
Yeah, but then there's people out there who do. And you have to read those people. Otherwise, you're just like listening to
Who
hillbillies in trailer
understand?
parks who are like, yeah, pick me up, put something in my butt.
Yeah.
And I like, there's two like camps within like UFO conspiracy. You've got like the Jacques Valets and people like that,
Yeah.
and the government people and the who are studying this stuff with like
Supposedly.
academically, and then they're like driving out to some trailer park in like New Mexico to get the abduction story from some guy who has more non-working cars in his front yard than he has working cars in his
Yeah.
driveway, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it up until the last few years it's always seemed one of those conspiracies that we're never going to get to the bottom of. Whereas like my wheelhouse and the things that I like the most is um history stuff that it's possible to really dig into. There's documentation. there
Hmm.
there could be a book out there that breaks the Templars wide open and you can like discover it. Whereas feels like way too much government involvement and smart people involvement for me to figure it out.
Uh,
It's sci-fi. I'm less a sci-fi nerd and more of a like D&D, like
so you're more
fantasy,
Game of
medieval.
Thrones
Yeah,
than Battlestar
100%. I've
Galactica
never seen
kind of
Battlestar
thing.
Galactica.
Actually, that's a good show.
I've never watched an episode of Star Trek. I like Star Wars,
Well, yeah,
but
those are different animals.
yeah, for sure. Apples and oranges.
Yeah.
All right. So what I was saying is I've never this is one like area of conspiracy that I've never really looked into too much because it never really grabbed my interest as much as other areas. And so this week and the week before, I started just like peeking around and looking into it a little bit more because of some of the things that have popped up in the news over the last couple of years in this area. And I was like, was curious if we've ever had any, some of these states and cities have these like mass, well, they call them flaps in the UFO
Yeah.
um universe, and that's where like mass sightings are or repeated sightings in one area, like
A wave
concentration
at
of.
one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, do we have like one instance of that in Virginia? And I kind of the first kind of thing I saw was I believe in the 1950s there was a bunch over DC and they scrambled jets, or I don't even know if they were jets in the 50s. They were
Yeah.
biplanes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there was a period in the 50s where like over the course of I think a few days or like a week there was like
Yeah.
weird lights in the sky above the White House and
Mm.
stuff. And I was like, it's kind of Virginia. Maybe we can go with that. I kept digging a little bit more, and it turns out Virginia is balls deep in this stuff.
There you go.
We're flappy.
We're very flappy.
So I'm gonna
Flappy
just
even
run
recently.
through um three of them and I'll kind of go back in history. I'm gonna start in 1987 with one, um, and then go back to 87 is one, 71 there was one, and then around 1964 there was one. So the one that happened in 1987 was pretty interesting, and I kind of ran out of time looking into this one, but I can kind of go over a little bit of it, and it is one of these kind of mass sighting things. And what's really weird is like grew up in the state, and I've heard about UFO sightings and things like this from all over the country. And again, that same thing that we say about like Virginia, like there's tons of stuff that happens in
Mhm.
Virginia conspiracy wise, and I don't know, it just never really like pops up much. And I personally think that has something to do with like the massive amount of like government installations and things like that we have in this
Mhm.
state. And Virginia has this very specific kind of image, and they kind of hold that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 1987, in a town called Withville. Do you know where Withville is?
I was thinking about this, and I should have pulled it up on a map because I feel
It's
like
the
I've
only one I
driven by
didn't.
the sign a
Yeah,
lot.
it's. I don't think it's far.
I want to say it's on the other side of Charlottesville, maybe before you get over the
Yeah,
mountain.
which is pretty interesting because
I know
all
it's
three of
close to the
these.
mountains, close to the Blue Ridge,
Okay,
over
so
there somewhere.
okay, so that makes us even
While you're
more
talking, I'm gonna
interesting.
pull it up and
So
find
he's
it.
going to pull up Withville. So 1987, three deputies saw a UFO. Um, three sheriff's deputies. They even went to the sheriff and like uh ran it all down to him, and it was this big gigantic thing floating several feet above a field. I think kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Sorry, again, this one I kind of rushed through kind of researching this one. But anyway, so three deputies see this. There was a radio reporter in the area. Remember this in 1987, so that was kind of a
That was
thing.
back when they had radios
And
and you
reporter
could call
radio
in.
reporters. Yeah, call in lines. Um so this radio reporter, his name was something Gordon. Um, he used to call the sheriff like each before each broadcast, a little bit before his broadcast every week or every day. I don't remember what it was, and he would just holler at the sheriff like, "Hey, is there anything going on?"
Yeah,
And
Daryl and his other brother, Daryl,
yeah, pretty much.
ran off the road with the moonshine
Yeah,
again.
yeah, and he would get like a rundown of any kind of pertinent news that happened in the county or the area at that time. And the sheriff tells him this story about these three deputies who run across a UFO, and he wasn't even going to include it because he was like, this isn't really my deal. It's not really news. It's a weird UFO sighting, but he did, and he kind of talked about it that night after the broadcast. He drove out with another guy, a, a, a second witness, out near the site, just to kind of peek around. And they brought a bunch of cameras and stuff like that. And they sat out there for an hour, and they were like, didn't see anything. So they were like, screw it, let's get out of here. They go to get back in the car, or they do get back in the car, and all of a sudden they see this thing that they claimed was 2 football fields in length sitting in the same place, like hovering, sitting in the same place that these cops had seen. And he said they just kind of both stood there dumbfounded, each thinking the other guy was going to grab a camera, and just stood there for like 10, 15 minutes staring at this thing. And then it disappeared. And then they both kind of realized that they hadn't,
Whoops.
yeah, they screwed up. So it doesn't stop there. The next night, a bunch of people see this thing, and a bunch of photos are taken, and he starts getting like these photographs brought to him. The reporter, his he gets contacted, it's said, by the feds in the story. I don't know which department particularly it was, but they immediately contact him. And this goes out and kind of a podunk radio station, and within like a day or two he gets contacted, and they want a debriefing of what he saw. And he tells them. A couple nights later, him and his wife are at the mall. They go to get in their car, and they hear there's a school bus full of kids next to them in the parking lot when they get in the car to leave. And they hear the kids screaming on the bus, and they're like, what in the hell? They look up, there's a gigantic like UFO in the sky, and all the kids are freaking out, right?
Mm.
um I'm sorry, this was 6 weeks later. This wasn't a couple nights later. So 6 weeks later. So this went on and on. um Within the year between 1987 and 88, there were 1,500 reports filed of UFOs in the Withville area. Now,
That's a
again,
lot.
I'm sorry, this was a really crappy kind of summary of the Withville incident, they call it. Um, but that's a little bit. I mean, that's pretty weird. I kind of categorize um, these sightings depending on who kind of saw it and reported it, and when it really grabs your attention when it's three law enforcement officers and then a reporter who's got a friend with him, and then the reporter and his wife and a busload of kids. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like
Starts to.
it's a little different than the guy. And I have nothing against trailer parks. I really, really don't. I come from basically a trailer park, but you know what I'm talking about. All right. So then there's the Virginia Giant incident, which I love this one because this actually talks about an entity and
A
a ship
Nephilim?
together. It could be Nephilim.
Could be a Nephilim. Could be my uncle.
So this happened in 1971 in Fredericksburg.
Okay.
So again, getting up around that general area. A 15-year-old kid was camping with his friends in the woods. They heard a bunch of noise and they all kind of like split up to go like take a look. This 15-year-old kid had his dog with him, a German Shepherd. Um, he might have been a member of the Process Church of the Final
I knew you were
Judgment.
going to
Yeah,
go there.
right.
I knew it.
The conspiracy nerds know what
If
I'm
that
talking
was the
about.
case, he would have been
Yeah,
dead.
nobody else knows. Okay, so around 10 o'clock, he's walking out with his dog. He doesn't really see anything, and he comes to this clearing where there's a little pond, and he sees this massive glowing round thing hovering above the pond. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
or hovering above the ground in a field next to the pond.
Next to the pond.
He's like stunned and just stands there staring at it, and all of a sudden this thing speeds towards him, stops like 15-20 yards away from him. Feet, like landing gear type stuff, comes out of the bottom of it. Then a ramp comes out of it. Okay. And a powerfully huge, shiny man with long arms, like crazy long arms, like Bigfoot like long arms, walks out holding a glowing box. And then the German Shepherd barks, and the thing like turns around and supposedly like moved really weird and bouncy, like up the thing. But he described this thing as powerfully large.
Was it one of those funny
Yeah,
arm
it's that's
things that's
kind of
at
what
the
I
used
like
car
pictured,
dealership?
a wacky waving
Holding,
inflatable arm
yeah,
flailing tube man.
holding
I
a
think it might have been.
holding a glowing
It could have
box.
been. All right. So the dog scares it off. 2 nights later, this 15-year-old is at home and his sisters are out. And he's got two sisters and they're,
Suspicious.
yeah, yeah. Always when it's like, but bear with me. Um, so
Who was?
2 nights later, his sisters are out on the town. They live out in the country. He's home and they pull off the main road coming back home and pull onto their driveway, which is like a really long, winding, like country driveway. Um, when they pull onto the driveway, their car dies and comes to a sudden like stop. And they're like, what the heck? They look up and hovering above the tree line is a round craft with the bottom of it glowing like a blue color.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they just stand there and stare at it. And after about 5-10 minutes, the craft takes off and their car starts back up. They didn't have to turn the key. The car just started going
Turned
again.
itself on.
A
Or
week later
resumed.
in Pennsylvania, there was a sighting of the like very similar description of the craft, and the person who saw it also saw the being in it, and it was again a powerfully large being with
Are you saying being or bean?
being
Like a
being.
green, a powerfully
He was
large
a non-human
navy
being.
bean or being?
Anywho, so they see the same craft and the same being. So 15-year-old kid sees the craft and the being. I'm not gonna say being anymore. The thing,
How
the
do they know it was the
entity,
same guy? Same thing.
And the sisters see what is described as the same craft a week later in Pennsylvania, same craft, same entity. And then a week after that in Australia, the same craft and the same type of entity is described as well. Interesting. Now, this is the, nope, wrong page. This is the really interesting one. This one is in 1964 in Fishersville. It's the Fishersville UFO landing, which is near Stanton.
Okay. I was gonna look
Again,
that up. Withville is in between, like it's on 81 between Radford and Abingdon, by the way.
so
So Southwest Virginia.
oh, southwest.
Yeah.
How far west?
In the narrow bit.
Oh, so
So
very,
if you went,
very southwest.
yeah, if you went south on 81 from Roanoke past Radford, past Pulaski, Withville is down that a way.
Okay, so not the same area. That's Shine
It's the
Country.
same area as in Virginia.
Well, yes, that's definitely Virginia,
Yeah, it's in that area. It's in the
but
Virginia area.
yeah. Okay,
Fishers. All right, that's the other end of the valley up there.
okay. So
Fishersville.
1964 Fishersville UFO landing near Stanton or
Hmm.
Staunton,
I'd always
depending.
say Stanton.
I say Stanton too because that's how normal people say it,
I
but it's
think so.
spelled Staunton.
Staunton.
Anyway, a man driving down. This is a good one. This reminded me a lot of the Mothman kind of type scenario where tons of people saw it for a prolonged period of time. The government got involved, and it's kind of crazy that we've never really heard about this. Is this where Floyd Fest is? Is Fishersville near Floyd?
No, Floyd is south. Somewhere over
Okay, because there was
here.
also another mass sighting around Floyd because they have like a UFO like festival every year. So again, like these things happen. I feel like they happen just as much, if not more, than like I feel like Ohio has a lot of them, and obviously the Southwest and whatnot.
Come on, sightings?
Yeah, like mass sightings.
Well,
Where
there's something we'll pull up. We'll pull up later, and I'll get you to share it on the screen.
okay,
The national
MUFON,
uh database,
is it
the
MUFON Mutual
UFO
UFO?
reporting database
Yeah.
thing. It has dots for all of them going back to like
Oh, like back to.
95 or something.
Oh, okay.
And then it has them in green when they're recent. But Virginia is not in the top five. I think California is number one.
So here's the deal, because we'll talk about
And
this because
actually, Arizona and or no, Virginia might be in the top five, but Arizona and New Mexico are not. Or Nevada. Neither of those three are in the top grouping as far as
see,
sightings.
and when you talk
But there's
about
a lot less people.
right,
So
and when
there,
you
then you
talk
have to get into those things
when you
like,
talk about
well,
California, that's basically be like taking from Georgia to Pennsylvania.
well, you're also talking about, which we'll get into later, is what kind of installations are there and the
Yeah,
numbers of them as well.
for sure.
So we'll get into
All
that.
right. So Fishersville UFO landing 1964. Man driving down the road. Again, his car cuts off and comes to an abrupt stop. He has no idea why. The same type of craft as the last one that I talked about is like 100 yards away in a field. He looks like over once his car comes to a stop, looks over in the field next to him. There's a craft hovering 100 yards away in the field. Um, he goes home and he's like stuck there looking at it until it slowly rises and then disappears like in the blink of an eye, like really, really quickly. And he thinks it's too crazy to tell anybody, and he doesn't plan on saying anything to anybody. And then just out of happenstance, he runs across an ad about a meeting at the local college, which is the Eastern Mennonite College, which I don't know if it's even still there. But it's a UFO club having a meeting.
A UFO club,
Yes, at the Eastern Mennonite College.
the annual anal probe
Yeah,
survivors convention.
Alien Dittlers
Yeah.
Society. Um, so he goes and he tells him the story. Well, it just so happened that a professor from the university was like kind of part of the club, and he goes out with the guy to the site where he saw it, and he brings a Geiger counter with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he recorded 60 counts per minute at the site where the guy said he saw it. I don't know what that means, but I'm sorry, 60. Did I say 60,000 counts?
I think you said 60 counts per
Yeah, not
minute.
60 counts, 60,000 counts per minute.
So that's got to be the counts have to be the
Yeah,
clicks,
the
right?
clicks. And I
So
guess
60 a
that,
minute would just be
and
one a
that
second's not
Geiger counter picks
right.
up like radiation, right?
Yeah, picks up
Okay.
radiation.
So some sort of nuclear powered something was there.
Right.
Um, if 60,000 counts is a big deal, I don't know. A microwave might make 60,000 counts. I didn't really have time to look that
I
up,
have
but it
no
sounds
idea.
like a big number. So 60,000 counts per minute. Um, Somehow the professor gets a hold of somebody in the government, and immediately investigators from Project Blue Book. Now, Project Blue Book was started. Can you look up what year that was started? I want to
Project
say,
Blue Book.
yeah, I think it was started in the 50s, maybe.
FYI, a Geiger counter at 10,000 um is fatal within weeks.
Okay, so it'd be a good idea to look up these guys in Fishersville and
They
see how
did. They did.
if they died soon after that,
They
because
did.
it didn't really share that part. So Project Blue Book was this like I guess kind of a semi-secret government.
1947 to 1969 Air Force program that investigated unidentified flying objects.
There you go. So right after the Roswell thing that happened in 47,
Mhm.
they create an arm of the Air Force intelligence that goes out, and they sent these people for years. They sent them obviously from 47. We're talking about 64 here. So for years they were going out and making contact with any people who claimed UFO sightings or abductions and whatnot, and they kind of they categorized them, investigated them to see if there was anything to them. Strangely, I've listened to a couple podcasts about Project Blue Book, and I want to say, and I could be wrong on this, but I feel like they discontinued Project Blue Book around a time when when the investigators for Blue Book were like really getting somewhere, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Yep, nope, never mind," shut it down, and it went to like a different department or a different intelligence kind of agency, like took it over, and it wasn't.
So the quick overview says it terminated in 1969 due to lack of evidence supporting extraterrestrial origins or national security concerns, as
Yes, but
well as the findings of the Condon Committee, whatever that was.
right, they put together a committee that said, "Oh yeah, there's nothing to this," but I mean,
And
they even did
this was
a
the guy that said that the main Roswell crash was the weather balloon. That was part of
yes,
that whole
yes.
process was Blue
But
Book.
I do remember from what I've listened to before that the guy who was the head of Blue Book was not
Freemason.
necessarily a true believer, but like I think he kind of came in as a skeptic and was turned after being the head of this department, and he was kind of the one who was like, no, 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 there's something to this, and they just shut it down.
Yeah, he was a 33rd degree Freemason, and
Oh,
his family had Templar origins.
and they may have been members of the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
Yeah, I
All right,
think so as well.
disregard that. Okay, so they sent investigator David Moody, who was one of the lead investigators for Project Blue Book, um, down to or over to Fishersville to interview the man and the professor and whatnot. He told a local paper while he was there it was an unusual sighting, and if it was a routine sighting, he wouldn't be there. So he wasn't just one of the Blue Book kind of grunts where they sent
Right.
out to, kind of pay lip service. Like they sent a lead guy out there because this was an interesting one. For about a month between Stanton and Richmond, there were like thousands. of
Mm.
sightings. So much so that armed groups of men started patrolling the towns between Stanton and Richmond, like walking around alien hunting. Um, so much so that a guy thought he'd be funny and dressed up as a Martian and was like kind of running around through the woods
That sounds like something I
and
would do.
about got shot by like three different groups of these alien hunters. There was literally a church, I think it was the Mennonite college church, like came out and said, "This is a sign of the apocalypse and Jesus is coming. And he's coming to Fishersville."
Coming to Fishersville. Coming
So
to a
there was a
Fishersville near you.
yeah, there was like this legitimate apocalypse scare
Yeah.
for a while. And again, like this happened between Stanton and Richmond. It's a pretty long stretch. An area we're both very familiar with. I've never heard a word about any of this. You know what I mean?
I haven't either, but I also chalk part of that up to the way I was raised. I will never forget the first time somebody told me that they had seen a UFO. And it was this guy that was a contractor working on our old
Of
house
course it was.
in
Probably lived in a
Hopewell,
trailer
and
park.
we were hanging around in the front sidewalk one evening if he finished up and was getting ready to go, me and him and my dad, and he was putting me on though, and I was probably 8 at the time or something like that. And he was like, "Yeah, it's a big triangle shaped thing came right over the river here, and I saw it clear as day. I swear it was a UFO." And when I was a kid, I thought, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
But he was just putting me on,
Yeah.
But I never heard people. Nobody I know has ever told me that they've actually seen a UFO. And anytime any of that stuff ever came on my TV, my dad was just quick to talk about like that person's drunk, that person's on drugs, that
Sounds like
person's
your dad.
crazy. That's all he said.
Yeah.
It could never. There was never any validity to anything anybody ever had to say
Yeah.
because they were always a drunk or on drugs or nuts. And
Which is probably accurate about
about most things
90 yeah.
in life.
Yeah.
That was the thing. Nah, it's not true. They're
Their
drunk.
own drugs. Um, okay. So apocalypse scare, everybody's freaking out. The newspapers start suggesting out loud, like in the newspapers, to please send the National Guard to the area because of the amount of sightings. Like this was a mass panic in Virginia.
Mm.
Uh and
What year was this?
1964.
Okay.
And so much so that Operation Blue Book kept investigators in the Shenandoah Valley for a full year
Wow.
after that. So they were like dug in, like this is important. And I guess considering, you know, well, I guess this was kind of the first of the big ones. I don't know. Anyway, so what's interesting that I kept coming up against was that this happened in 1964, and Blue Book just one day, you know, like I said, they were kind of entrenched there for like a year, and then one day they just up and left, and everybody in town was like, "Hey, what the heck? We're still seeing." I think it had like the sightings had like trickled off, and then apparently 1965 was a huge year
Hmm.
for UFO sightings all across the country, and so I guess it had been fairly quiet. There had been like a lull from the early 50s, like until 1964, and then this all starts in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and then in 1965 it just blows up with sightings all over the country.
Mm.
So kind of interesting there. And that's all I've got a little
I
bit
think this
on
would be
another
a good
topic.
time to pull up something on your screen just
Okay.
for people to be able to see. Uh, just just pull up the National UFO Reporting Center, and you all listening can go check this out. It's a global. I think this is the one that I was looking at earlier. That's a global one, but um, people can make sighting reports, and it actually goes into this database with a pin on the map, and then it actually has the information like categorized. What was the shape? What was the color? Go to the map at the top there. Yeah. What was the size? What was the shape? What was the color? And then it has red dots for overall, and then it has green dots
Why
for
do they
recent.
only hang out in
No, hey, check
America?
this out. That's cool. So keep scrolling around. Look at the hot spots. You have the U.S., California, and East Coast, obviously, smattering in the Midwest. But then, like Ireland, that's what I thought was weird. Is you have like all of Europe, and then like everyone in Ireland apparently sees UFOs. Ireland, not in Ireland,
England
in
too.
England, in the southern south of
But
England.
do you think that that's just a reporting
Well,
thing?
as I would imagine, once again, it's based on density. I mean, England is so
Yeah,
densely populated. You know,
yeah.
you're not going to have a lot in Iceland.
And then people in
And I
France and
mean, nobody
Spain, they're like,
lives
we
in
live in
most of
France and
Russia.
Spain. Who
So there's
cares?
nobody in most of Russia to report something if
Now,
they were to get on this thing and report it, you know.
now wasn't the Fatima, was that in Italy or Spain?
Spain.
That was in Spain, right?
Hmm.
Where's that at?
Oh.
So what is the difference in colors mean?
Green is recent and
Okay.
red is older. And I think this database has all these points mapped going back to 1995. But go over to Virginia and kind of like zoom into Virginia there. Do you know where Virginia is on that
I
map?
do. I can
Okay, we're
see
gonna
it. It's
test
right
your
here.
geography skills. But look how densely packed that
Yeah.
is. And then you'll have, if you really get in there, you'll get what you referred to earlier as flaps, where you see like a bunch of them collectively. And apparently, the
All
number
around
one
Richmond.
spots in Virginia is
Oh wow.
Norfolk, Virginia Beach, their area, obviously, Alexandria,
This is us,
Richmond,
right?
and then Roanoke. Yeah,
Around here is us.
I put all those in there, by the way.
Just in case.
But then, like, if you click on,
So we're talking about
you're
now.
talking
You
about out
said
that
this
part
goes
of the
back
state.
to 95, but this was kind of the area.
Yeah, well, you see Lynchburg bottom left, so Withville's farther down than that, and then,
Okay.
you can see Stanton, like up
Yeah.
center, middle.
But this
So
was
that'd be
the
about Fishersville,
yeah.
and
Okay.
yeah.
That is wild though.
But it's kind of cool. And then it's interesting to click through them because, like, go down to like around Williamsburg, for example. There were some interesting ones in Williamsburg I was looking at, and there were three that were all on the same date in I think August of last year, for example.
And you can't click on them.
Or maybe it was closer to whatever. But click on that green one right there.
Oh, and guess where it is?
Right on William and Mary campus.
I'm not
Archer's
kidding,
Hope.
dude. Look,
Archer's
no,
Hope.
it's at the top of the this.
At the
Why does it
intersection
say
of Richmond
32? Were
Road
there
and
32
yeah,
sightings
so that's 32 at one
at
time.
the apex
So
of
the
the?
number, there's one farther down is 151.
But this is the Virgin. This is the William and Mary
Yeah,
pyramid.
yeah. I
This is
know. I see it.
what does this say?
Well, click on it and
I'm gonna view them
look at the
details.
details because then what it tells you is the shape, color, and then it has a description that each person gave, and then
Oh
they
Lord.
tend to have an explanation on the right. Like it'll say Starlink, for example, because somebody will say,
Holy
"I saw a string of
shite.
lights." And then it'll say, "Oh, this was Starlink for sure." And then it'll say, "I saw a flash and something shoot across the sky," and it says meteor,
I mean,
obviously.
look at this. Radio went
But there
dead.
are others that have no explanation, and people just talk about all this stuff. Like this is a good example here, and that's right there on the capstone of
Yeah.
your.
Orange light
How
streak.
about that?
Oh, speaking of which, I am taking a pilgrimage to my hometown at about 4 o'clock in the morning so I can watch the solstice sunrise next week.
Yeah.
Near and I'm gonna I'm gonna stay there all day so I can watch the sunset too. I just want to see if there's any weird alignments with the monuments and things like that on the historic campus of William and Mary.
Huh.
Nerd stuff. So
Well, so this database, anybody should go look at it. It's kind of interesting because, of course, there are things that are explainable in there, and then there are things that are
the
not.
power plant.
But I want to bring us up to a
Let,
little bit more
let me just say something too.
recent.
Like Williamsburg is not a kook town. Like it's not like a city. These are all, this town is filled with nothing but like upper middle class, like soccer moms. And
But it also has a lot of retirees who could be starting to slip a little bit.
yeah, that's true. I could see that.
I mean, I don't think you're going to have
Large
32 of
gray
them
cylinder,
slip in one night and see the same thing.
four dancing lights again in Virginia. Speaking of which, and I'll get into this a little later, but this is also where the farm is, Camp Perry, the most covert CIA base in the CIA. Very few
Yeah.
people know very much about it. I found one quote from one ex agent who talks about it, and it's mind like the short little like line that she says about it is pretty mind blowing. Um, anyway, so we're back.
Well, so I want to bring us a little bit, I guess, up to date and why this is a relevant topic anymore because, Roswell, everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And, everybody's seen Unsolved Mysteries in the 80s when they were talking about UFOs. And there's that Netflix documentary of that woman. What is it called? Abduction in Manhattan or something about the woman who claims she got sucked out of her apartment window. And then there's a debate about whether she faked it or not, even
I never
writing
heard about
letters
that
as
one.
if she was. That's a fun documentary to watch because it doesn't make you think like, oh, now I believe in aliens or I don't believe in
Yeah.
aliens. It's an interesting dynamic between these two women and whether the story was true or made up.
Yeah.
And it's just very well done, but I digress. So this has all become relevant again, though, for those who don't know. And I'm not going to get into all the gory details because there's tons of other podcasts interviewing these people directly and lots of stuff out there. But in the last couple of years, we've all of a sudden had these congressional hearings and these bombshell reports about government programs that for ages they have denied exist in the first place that apparently are like Blue Book have been reopened to investigate what is going on with what they now call UAPs and now even UAVs because there's been lots of sightings and they're not decreasing in frequency. If anything, they're
Yeah.
increasing in frequency. And then you have this whole issue of stuff underwater as well.
Yep.
So there were two congressional hearings in the last couple of years with former directors of the intelligence community, um, a, a former rear admiral of the Navy pilots,
Mm-hmm.
and of course this Tic Tac video that a lot of people have probably heard about, where the targeting computer, I know that sounds like Star Wars, but that's what I'm going to call it. The targeting computer on this one plane tracked this thing flying along um, just above the seafloor and a host of other things. So it's really come back to the forefront. But the interesting thing is that there seem to be more of these, what they call whistleblowers, coming out from inside the military and the government talking about the programs are real and the programs are real because the things are real and we have to take them seriously. And the government's been lying for years and they need to stop lying about it and be more transparent with the people. And then, of course, government officials have gotten on that. What's her name? From South Carolina, Nancy Mace, has filed a report and talked to the media about it. The Burchett guy from Tennessee has been all
Mm-hmm.
over it, trying to say we need to do something about it. And interestingly enough, this is a bipartisan issue where Democrats and Republicans are saying that they hope, and a lot of people were saying this before Trump was reelected, but we're hoping that he was going to, in the whole Doge kind of thing, was going to also have the government be more transparent and probably release some more documentation about UFOs, UAPs, UAVs, and tell the public what they need to know. Um, and some of these stories that people have actually do also have to do with Virginia. Again, a lot of the sightings that we have in Virginia from the military and government side of things they've talked about have taken place off the coast of Virginia in the Atlantic, spotted by Navy pilots, tracked by Navy ships, both underwater and above water. So, what do you make of that?
Well, we are. I think this would be a good time to talk a little bit about what we think these things could be and the different possibilities of if they are real, which I think it's kind of undeniable that there's something up there, but what they could be. Because the water thing is interesting. I just listened to a very smart guy who talked about, and he's been in the UFO research game for a long time, and he was a very respected, I can't remember his dang name, but he was very respected academic, and kind of started looking into UFOs to
Was this the
disprove
guy
himself.
Jacques Vallée talked about
I
in his Joe Rogan podcast? And the guy was actually in London. There was nothing conspiratorial about it. The guy literally walked off the sidewalk and looked the wrong way, which people have a
No,
habit
this is
of
not it.
doing, and
No,
he
because I
got hit
just
by a
listened to
car.
the guy
But
talk.
he was like very respected
No, this is a guy
physicist
who's
and
still
wrote all these
writing
books.
books and
Okay.
whatnot, but he's balls deep in it. Anyway, so I I don't necessarily believe in little green men. I don't think that there's I don't think there's something out there other than us, but there's other options which get crazy, but I think they're more like likely. Like there's this theory that aliens are not from another planet. They're actually us from the future. Okay. And basically, the idea is that at some point in our past, we figured out how to get into the future. And like a breakaway civilization was able to time travel to the future. And these depictions of the gray aliens, they've had a bunch of people talk about how that's how it seems likely that that's where the human race would evolve to. These spindly, kind of weakish looking bodies, right? Because as technology advances, the um necessity for a stronger, more stout, like you look at Cro-Magnon man or like Neanderthals and stuff like that, and they were these big, block-headed, short, stout, like linebackers. And then we've lost hair, you know we've adapted to our environment, if you believe that we, however that goes. um but that a more technologically advanced version of ourselves from the future may, who live possibly in space, would lose a lot of pigment and maybe become gray. Our bodies would, I don't know, deteriorate, but like evolve into like a body that isn't necessarily need to be as athletic as humans are now. That possibly our heads would grow bigger because of like brain capacity and intelligence, that our eyes would grow larger because we're living in a, if they were living in space, they, whatever.
Yeah, I get
But then
where you're going with it.
um there's also the idea of these breakaway civilizations. Like I just pulled up this thing that I'd heard about a long time ago, which is called the Sonora Air Club. And it's like this mid 19th century club that didn't get discovered until they found this man's diaries that got, after a fire got set out of the family home on the sidewalk for anybody to come grab. And it's all these crazy like paintings and diagrams of the like air machines. And it was supposedly in his diaries, it was this like group of people of air travel enthusiasts, like before there was air travel, who met in Sonora, California to do these builds and experiments. And then those people just kind of disappeared. And so they've been talked about as like a breakaway civilization. And then you talk about these things coming in and out of the water. There's all these myths and legends about subterranean people and things like the Hopi have the ant people, and There's all over the world. There's these stories of people who live in the hollow earth, um, and then also underneath the water. If you wanted to hide a breakaway civilization, or if you were a intelligence from another planet who wanted to utilize Earth, better than just floating around up in space where there's a bunch of satellites and rockets. I mean, Elon's shooting off 10 rockets a week. A better place to hide would probably be
Under the water.
under the water. I don't know if that was a coherent thought to what you were asking me, but you were talking about Virginia and whatnot, and all this new talk in Congress and whatnot. Would this be a good time to go over my list of how weird Virginia is as far as government goes?
Yeah, I mean, we can get to that because that will kind of segue into what some people who are arguing that there is a pattern to sightings
Okay.
and a pattern to contact, and the reason that it would make sense that people in the government are paying attention to it, and particularly some of these encounters that have been very well documented, that involve the military. Why would that be the case?
Okay. So, Virginia in particular, we have the largest CIA presence of any state in the country. We have the largest defense contractor presence of anybody in the country. We are in the top 5 states for NASA contractors. We have the most military. Well, we have the second most military in Virginia behind California, which again would be like,
Military installations, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
which would be, California. They win everything for a lot, not CIA or defense contractors, but they are, they're up there for a lot of things just simply because of the size. Um, we have the most defense research facilities of anywhere in the country. $68.5 billion in defense research spending in 2023. We have the Air Force Research Laboratory. We have Langley Air Force Base, which had sightings. That's in Hampton. Um, Grew up in Williamsburg, just down the street from Hampton, my whole life. And the only reason that I knew that Langley Air Force Base was there and had the wind tunnels for NASA, and that's where the NASA research laboratory is because my dad raced stock cars at the local stock car track that was right across the street from the wind tunnels.
He was
Um,
going so fast, people
he
thought it was
was.
a
We never
UFO.
got to use them. It could have shaved a couple
There goes a
times.
UFO. Oh no, he's just driving his car.
um, we have the Naval Weapons Station in Yorktown, which Yorktown and James City County kind of straddles both, which specializes in energy projects. They're about to build a nuclear reactor. Um, there, Camp Perry in Williamsburg, my hometown, which is affectionately referred to as the Farm, which is a 9,000-acre CIA covert training facility, training in shooting, meditation, and recruiting assets. Meditation that feels an awful lot like MK Ultra type. Uh,
So those we brought that up briefly in another one. What
the
what is that
remote
called? The remote
viewers,
viewers,
and
yeah.
yeah,
That's what it sounds like.
seems interesting. So there's an ex CIA agent author named Amaryllis Fox, which sounds like a hot, like femme fatale, like
Like a Soviet
Amaryllis
undercover
Amaryllis
agent.
Fox. Anyway, she wrote a book called Life Undercover, and what she said about the farm or Camp Perry is that it is a simulated Truman Show set in a fictionalized country called the Republic of Britannia. And her training there involved the quote unquote bond business. how to flip a car, drive a speedboat, shoot a Glock, withstand torture. I mean, I literally grew up with this place in my backyard, and you just knew that it was a CIA base, and you never went on there. And a bunch of your friends' dads worked there, and they didn't know what their dads did.
Hmm.
um, Interesting. Then we've got Mount Weather, just outside, about an hour outside of DC. That's an unacknowledged continuity of government facility. So literally, when the
What the
fit
hell does
hits
that mean?
continuity of government, so
Oh, right,
that's
right, right,
yeah, that's
right.
the plan that's in
You,
place if if there's a nuclear attack or an alien invasion, they have an entire underground under mountain
yeah.
city set up in Virginia, and that's where whatever is left of the government goes and reforms and kind of protects themselves in a bunker until it's safe to come back out. And then there's some semblance of a society or control system for whoever's left on the surface.
Sorry, we're not going to get out of it that easy,
No,
folks. They'll come back and
yeah,
put
we're
us
not
right
invited.
back into it.
And then of course we have the naval excuse me, the naval station, Norfolk, which is the world's largest naval base. Not America's or the
The
American
world's
government, but the world's largest naval base. And this is just a
and the shipyard says not only
yeah,
the base is they're manufacturing
yeah,
as
and then
well.
you got the shipyard right there too. So, and this is just an aside, but just talking about covert, secret, they just found out a few years ago that a on the naval base in Norfolk, a secret defense secret police like unit had been formed on the naval base that had no ties to anything in the government, but they had acquired billions of dollars of like security equipment, like everything from like just guns and body armor to like high level vehicles and stuff like that. It was happening on the base under like several base directors and whatnot knew about it and never did anything about it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, somebody found out and they're like, "What? This isn't an arm of the government. Like, what are you doing here?" And they just kind of like disbanded it. It's like this weird,
It's
like
bizarre.
secret police. Yeah, there's several articles about it. I think it was like maybe like 2020 or 2017, 18, 19. They had found it and then realized, holy crap, this has been going on for like 10 years. And they had acquired all this. So, like, what were they planning? And I don't know. It just seems really
Well, and
weird.
that's what's weird about some of this stuff, after the congressional hearings and the government saying we don't have these programs. And then you have these whistleblowers come out, like Luis Elizondo's another one that's been
Yeah.
on a bunch of the podcasts that was he in the ATIP or the Arrow program,
ATIP.
one of the
Yeah.
ATIP. And this is where they're even talking about apparently we're gathering all this data on these phenomenon.
Right.
But he also was, I think, the first person to say that there was actually a retrieval program
Mm-hmm.
that the government also says doesn't exist or did at that time. And then you had the stuff come out about the Immaculate Constellation program, which was kind of taking that even further, where then all of a sudden the government said, yes, we do have these programs, which means that there's taxpayer dollars going towards those programs. And you've been denying that this was the case all the time. And what strikes me as interesting is, again, nothing against anyone that lives in a trailer park, but the stereotype of some nutty drunk guy that lives in a trailer that sees a UFO by himself contrasts very sharply with multiple Navy personnel on the same training mission
Right.
that have it on radar, actual eye visuals, on targeting computers, captured on camera, and that this apparently has just become sort of a normal occurrence. And what is obvious is that whatever the thing is, it doesn't even, like you said, it doesn't even have to be little green Martian men
No,
coming from somewhere else in the universe. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think Lou Elizondo made that point. And he certainly sounds convincing. But the problem is, it is not something that we even remotely have the capability of manufacturing or understanding how it works.
publicly we don't have
Correct.
that knowledge.
But
Yeah,
it's so far beyond
yeah,
that the likelihood of it just being like the next generation of a stealth bomber, which we just recently unveiled, right, is
yeah,
this new stealth fighter thing, is so far
yeah.
behind
It's
these
like pales
things.
in comparison to what
And
these
the
things do.
same with the underwater ones, apparently, is
Hmm.
like based on Soviet torpedoes that can travel great distances at 200 miles an hour underneath the water, they still can't do what some of this stuff is that we're
Right.
encountering in the water can do. And this whole coming out of the water and into the water and all this kind of nonsense, is kind of interesting to me. The other thing that makes it seem like it's something plausible that wouldn't be, it kind of goes both ways. It could be our own because one of the patterns is that these things seem to appear around military installations, and particularly where there's nuclear
Yeah.
weapons involved or nuclear power.
They, I mean, I've listened to ex like heads of these
Right.
nuclear sites where they've come out and been. There's one guy who was like the guy who it was his job to monitor these nuclear missiles at this nuclear site, I think in Colorado or something like that. And um, he's writing books and whistleblowing on it now that like there was this event that happened where these MPs see this UFO and then all of a sudden all the nuclear weapons that they have just get shut off.
Yeah.
And
There's the
he finds
reverses
out
happen
later, like
too.
20 years later, that it not only happened at his site, but it happened at like
A
five
bunch of other
other
sites.
sites at the same time, the
I've
same event.
also read and seen interviews with these guys who say the reverse has happened before, where everything was armed at the same
Oh
time.
wow,
And they freak out because they
that's
think
even
the
creepier.
nukes are going to launch. And apparently, the Russians have experienced the same thing in intelligence sharing that they have acknowledged with some of these other same U.S. government programs. So there seems to be that commonality, and there's a bit, not to get off the kind of particular Virginia thing or get too far down a rabbit hole, but there's apparently also some of these people who claim to have been contacted by the things
Mm-hmm.
telepathically in some of these
Yeah,
encounters that they don't understand how it works, but they insinuate that the message delivered to them by these other beings was caution around the use of the nuclear
yeah.
weapons. And
Well,
you also see the sightings ramp up going all the way back to Roswell. I mean, you have ancient sightings and depictions and things,
yeah,
right? But it also seems to maybe make sense given that by the time we start testing nuclear weapons and the testing ramps up rapidly in the 50s and 60s and carries through into the
yeah.
80s and now not so much. Um, but that would make sense to where all of a sudden this visitation
It's like, hey,
ramps up because it's like, what in the world are you guys doing?
I
You know?
think it even makes more sense from a breakaway civilization that is sharing, you know what I mean, the
Mm.
planet with us more than it does people from outer space.
I've heard some people speculate that. They're
Like
like,
I
hey
could
guys, what are you
see,
doing? You're screwing up our atmosphere here.
right, like,
Yeah.
all right, now we got to come up
Or
out of the
we're
water and
harvesting you
tell you to
guys.
chill
We're
out.
harvesting you guys to eat you, and it's not helpful if you
Yeah.
guys wipe yourselves out with
I just
nukes.
I feel like if it was people from or whatever from another planet, like yeah, they would observe us, get what they need from us, get the intel, but I don't know that they would be so benevolent to come down and be like, hey guys. And actually, this is one thing that I've listened to a lot of people talk about along those lines. A lot of the a lot of the kind of commentary and suggestion that these are benevolent creatures who want to help us, a lot of that comes from this new age of Aquarius kind of uh religion, for lack of a better term, because their whole thing is that these ascended masters and you know the savior or whatever is coming. It's very Christian adjacent.
Well,
Um,
you can see, and this is my personal view, which I know we disagree on, but I feel like you can see potentially where some of the original belief, a lot of original religious belief potentially comes from.
yeah,
I mean, we you got these drone swarms in the last year, right, that
yeah,
caused all this stuff. And that's interesting to me too. I'll get to that in a second, that you have this difference between like UAP, UAV versus we know that's a cluster of drones. We can tell it's a cluster of
yeah,
drones, but it's still a problem because we don't know who they belong to. And you've got like Governor Youngkin making a formal statement that we're not getting information that we deserve to have because that's in our Virginia
backyard,
national
yeah.
airspace, and the government's not telling us enough. That's a different thing. But if you can imagine people having these sightings and going, "Oh my God, I saw this thing and I took a
Mhm.
picture of it, and what in the world is that? It must be from another thing." And you pull that back to an ancient, much more primitive group of people seeing lights in the sky. In my opinion, is probably the origin for angels and the idea of the angels
Mhm.
appearing to the shepherds,
Well,
and people, some exhausted shepherd who doesn't have clean drinking water that's just, downed a goat intestine flask of wine and is getting a little bleary eyed and he's about to just doze off and he
yeah.
looks up and holy shit, there's 12 alien spacecraft came out of the air and we're calling those angels because we don't know what they are. And maybe even if it was beings like some of
Yeah.
these people talk about came out of the thing.
Well, what I
Isn't that also
find,
part of the premise of Prometheus?
yeah,
That the origin
yes,
was
that we were
the
seated.
gods,
Okay.
and
So
so there's that other aspect to it too,
what
which
I find interesting about
I don't
that
know about
is
any of that.
that the same people who are atheists and believe that aliens are going to come down and save us, this like new age, maybe not atheist is not the right thing, but they believe in uh, or there is a sect out there that believes that it's possible that we are the product of panspermia, and that this country or this planet was seeded by an alien life, and then they use things from biblical and other world religion history to kind of explain that narrative. But the funny thing is that with the alien abduction UFO lore, you always have half the people are saying, "Oh, these are benevolent creatures who came down and told us to shut off our nuclear weapons and don't hurt anybody, and we're here to help you." And then an equal amount of people talk about, "That's not the experience that I got. They put stuff in my butt and they jacked me off and harvested my semen, and I think they're trying, you know what I mean, in this
Yeah.
really kind of malevolent side." But they're the same people who won't believe that, like you, my friend. No, just that's like aggressive, but can't fathom a god who panspermiated the earth. Is generally the same kind of story, with angels and demons in this like kind of spiritual realm. Yeah, you know what I mean. And that's,
I don't buy any of it
I know,
necessarily yet,
I didn't mean
and
you, but
I'm
I
not
mean,
I wouldn't be in either of those camps, but I see
right.
what you're saying. Because I still think there's part of me goes, well, it's possible something can build something that could travel here because we're steadily building something that can travel off of here. The
Yeah,
inverse is possible. But I think it was
or
Carl
so we've been
Sagan. I was
told.
trying to find the quote from him, but he had this great analysis of it's like a there's a name for the theory, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, but he basically said you would have to have hubris to believe that some other thing would have the technology to get here because if all of the stuff that we know about the cosmos is true, it's just as likely as the other most advanced civilization in the universe, if there was one, was in exactly the same technological state that we are.
E-
There's literally no reason to believe that some other planet could have had a group of beings that could invent a technology that could travel
except
too. So like
for,
there's some sort of scientific probability mathematical piece to that, and I can't remember what it
but
is.
also
But that was his basic thought
to
is like
refute that is
it's probably not anybody more advanced than we are,
but
was his
to
point.
refute that is the Goldilocks theory, and this is another thing that a lot of more spiritual people point to as proof of a higher power, and that's that there are hundreds of things about our atmosphere, our the makeup of the earth, the distance of the sun is just they refer to it as these Goldilocks elements to our planet and our way of
Right.
life that just a hair off of any of these calculations of where the sun is and the moon is and the tides happen and the microorganisms work and things like that, they it just any of those things are kind of off, then we don't have life on this planet. And they've never found anything with our Goldilocks universe. They've never found anything like that anywhere else.
Right.
And
I think
they
that
haven't
might have
even
been part of his point is if that's true, then the odds of that also happening somewhere else where a certain
right.
set of conditions would
We're
also be
exactly,
met
yeah.
where somebody could build something.
Unless you believe that space and the universe is infinite, and then if the universe is infinite, there's infinite possibilities, and then of course it's just like simulation theory in that
Yeah.
if the universe is infinite, then there's infinite possibilities, which statistically would mean that there is absolutely not only a possibility, but if that is the case, then 100% there is another planet in the universe that is exactly like ours. There's a guy named Daniel sitting down looking at a laptop on a podcast in some other galaxy,
And we're
some
talking
far, far
about
away.
multiverse
But
and
again,
alternate dimensions
that's
and
one of the things
physics and
that,
folding and all that,
yeah,
and yeah,
but
wild
that's the
stuff.
thing that bolsters kind of my faith and my worldview is that it does seem it it feels to me more of a plan here than it does chance. And yeah, that is just,
I would agree with that if you think the plan is complete and utter chaos. But I don't want to get down
do you not want to?
a
Because I just listened to
theological
a great podcast about the
tangent.
difference um between God's action and God's reaction.
Hmm.
And that in the very beginning of the Bible, where it says that on the seventh day, God rested, that the word in Hebrew for rested does not mean like took a nap. And like everybody like made that the day of rest as if that was the day you weren't supposed to work, and
Yeah, yeah.
as a tribute to that. But really what that word meant was kind of not finished, but came to rest. Like, okay, so he created in those 7 days, which could be 7 million years, depending, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But he finished the creation, and now from then on, he only reacts because God is a just God, and so he only reacts from that point until the coming and the millennial kingdom and all that and whatnot. I know, and that's deep into the to like theological theory and whatnot, but
And what that
it is an
means to
interesting
be
case.
reactionary in that case, because then, well, yeah, we could go way down on that one. And
Well, come on.
no,
All right, get
not
back to
not
the
right now.
UFOs.
We could do a whole what? I don't know how we tie that to Virginian conspiracy theory, but we could do a whole thing on that one. Maybe that would be a
Well,
Substack we call it.
yeah, that's gonna require me to be a lot smarter than I am, because that's just going to get into like a philosophical debate, and I don't contain the
Danger,
I don't
danger.
I don't have the ability to do that. So
Well,
shut
as
up.
opposed to debating the
You're
origins of the
going to hell,
universe,
Daniel.
let's
Just kidding.
yeah, so we're getting close to kind of wrapping here, I think anyway, but I want to kind of bring it back down to something that came out a couple days ago that I alluded to before you and I got on, which is maybe some people would attribute it to being a bombshell. So, was it 2017, 19, somewhere in there? I think it was the New York Times
Yes, it
was the
was.
one that first broke
I
all
believe it
this
was
stuff that led
2017.
to
Yeah.
the congressional hearings
Yeah, I
about this,
believe
which
that
was
was 2017.
unprecidented
And
to
that
have
was
these
the
congressional hearings.
was
That
that
was
the David
2017.
Grush?
That was Grush
Yeah.
and the rest of those guys. So they talked to, and then those some of those guys ended up in the congressional hearings. So Scott Bray, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, Ronald Moultrie, Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. Those guys were in the first round. Second round was David Grush, who was part of the UAP task force. Ryan Graves and David Frayer, who were pilots that encountered this thing, and that was when that Tic Tac video was shown to Congress, and people literally gasped
Yeah.
in Congress watching this thing. And then you had Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. He said, "We are not alone." He firmly believed that stuff is not ours and from somewhere else. Christopher Mellon, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Clinton and Bush, was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Clinton and Bush, said, "We are not alone, and the world is not prepared for the truth." Um, and he is prominently featured in the new documentary, which is supposed to be the most bombshell of all time, which is called why am I forgetting the name? Age of Disclosure.
Hmm.
It was previewed to an audience at South by Southwest, which is now not only a music festival but also a film festival, and people were floored by some of the other
Yeah.
people who talked on camera in that film. 6 days ago, the Wall Street Journal broke an article discussing a new report that suggests that the Pentagon has been intentionally spreading rumors about UFOs and sightings for decades and decades
Yeah.
on purpose to make people think that this was something to deflect from something else, we don't know what. And that report also is very clear to point out, I might add, that there's only one 100% positive case where they definitely did that. So they're inferring that maybe a lot of the sightings and reports and discussion and the programs could just be false flags to distract from something. And at least in one case, the Pentagon did that for sure. But that's also very broad for me to hear somebody say, like, the Pentagon is a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
The Pentagon did it. Well, what does that mean?
Hey, where's the Pentagon at?
Is it technically in Virginia?
It technically is.
Because it's not on the other side of the river, right? Because you
Yeah,
got to cross the
it's in
river into
Virginia.
Crystal City. Yeah. Um, but here's my thing too: is this complicates everything where you've got eyewitnesses from my great uncle Bernard was a loony. He made up all kinds of stories since he was a kid about stuff.
Or was he?
And you got people like that I saw a UFO and it
Mhm.
it killed my cow and it transformed into a Bigfoot and ran off that away.
Mhm.
You got these folks. You got Navy pilots and rear admirals and government officials. Buzz Aldrin, even I think, isn't
Mhm.
was he the astronaut that talked about running into stuff in space and was like, absolutely, there's stuff out there.
I
One
think
of
there was
one of the
one of
main
them, and then
astronauts
who
from that
said it
'60s
one time,
period.
and then like
Yeah.
then clammed
And then
up
he kind
about
of
it.
was supposed to stop it. So there's all this stuff, and there's about, the government's covering it up and telling people to stop talking. And at this point, I believe it's gotten so freaking convoluted.
Yeah.
It's the false flag is a false flag for a false flag, which is all supposed to cover up the fact that it's actually true. It's bizarre at this point, but more and more stuff keeps coming out. And I do wonder where this is going to go. I'm not personally settled on, yes, these are extraterrestrials and craft visiting us. But it seems to me there's something to this because I'm going to throw a couple other things out
Okay,
there
go ahead.
that I find interesting. Is it's one thing also for me personally to talk about government officials, but I know a person who's in the Navy. I'm not going to say who it is or where they are or what they do in the Navy.
Hmm.
But operates on this coast, that being the Atlantic coast, that has talked about this is pretty common occurrence for them at this point, is running across this stuff.
Really?
I know another person who is a friend of my wife's who is at a military installation for a certain branch that says the same thing. That's just kind of like widespread knowledge at this point that these things are considered to be something else. They're not the military covering up their own latest technological invention. So I just feel like there's at least so much out there that there has to be something to it. Um, Lou Elizondo is very careful about that when he discusses it. I'm not saying they're little green men from another planet coming to do this or not do this, but there's something there, and otherwise, we wouldn't be spending all this time and effort in doing the thing. And I can't imagine that you would launch multiple government programs and invest that kind of money to distract people away from something else that you were actually doing. But I did run across, I see you pulling up Werner.
Well,
Did you know
just
the Nazis had engineered a flying saucer in
yeah,
the
the
40s and they
and
actually were getting it off the ground? I mean, it was never functional to bomb
you know,
something.
at
But
Fort
I even wonder if, like, particularly the flying saucer idea, nowadays, I think it's maybe a different story with some of what people are seeing. But it's possible that the Nazis, since we took a lot of the scientists and brought them
well,
over,
yeah,
continue to work on that particular piece of equipment, and somehow they did get it off the ground well and rotating and figured out, and especially when you introduce, nuclear power.
it was some. So they had uh, with the Nazi Bell, which was this craft or
That's right, the
thing
bill.
that was shaped like a bell, and it had something to do with spinning mercury.
Mm.
Way over my head, but it had to do with mercury, and somehow that achieved uh like 0 point like or gravity, anti-gravity. I don't know, but what I was gonna say is, we're talking about um the government and these false flags that the government is responsible for, or these like disinformation operations to kind of muddy the waters around UFOs. I mean, obviously, the government has advanced technology that we don't know about until years afterwards, right?
I think the stealth bomber before it was known was probably
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of the triangles that people saw.
Oh, for
You
sure.
know,
And that was in a hangar somewhere, and some
yeah.
low level guy who had to drop off like a piece of equipment or something saw it at some point, and that became a UFO story somewhere. I mean, I would just have to guess because you
Yeah.
can't always keep those things under wraps. And but I was just gonna say, when you were talking about that we would be sort of remiss to not talk about. I hadn't even planned on talking about it, and I think everybody has heard a little bit about Werner von Braun, but it's interesting to me because my wife is down in Huntsville, Alabama, and I just looked something up online because I'd never. Anyway, Werner von Braun was a rocket scientist, a Nazi rocket scientist who, after World War II, there was basically a Nazi draft, and the English, the Russians, and the Americans, we put the uh, the Nazis that we couldn't use to death. And then some of the nastiest, worst Nazis um, were these high level SS scientists and things like that. We created a operation called Operation Paperclip, and this secret uh, program where we recruited these Nazis, and we brought them over to America, and they created NASA. There's actually
And some
funny,
of the cool hardware,
a great joke that I heard one time, and it was a uh, a Nazi, a Satanist, and a pedophile walk into a bar. What do? Create NASA, because Werner von Braun was a nasty Nazi. Um, uh, uh, JPL Laboratories. What's his name? Parsons. I always
Alan Parsons?
is that the Alan Parsons project?
I don't think so. I just
There's a band that's the something Parsons project, and I always get them confused. But
look at their album cover.
Parsons was the head of JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, out in California. Who, while he was a self taught rocket scientist from that came from old money or came from like estate kind of money out there. And while he wasn't in his own personal laboratory and shooting off rockets and whatnot, he was also in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard doing satanic sex magic rituals to open up the portal to hell and birth the Scarlet Woman, who would then suppose their goal was um, to give birth to the Antichrist, right? And actually,
I mean, what else are you going to do on a Friday night?
so, and that guy blew up, and
He
the
literally
theory
blew
is,
up.
yeah, he died in
He
his
blew up.
laboratory. His
Yeah, that
laboratory
makes
blew up.
sense.
But him, Werner von Braun, and Walt Disney was the propaganda side of NASA,
Mm.
who uh, possibly was a diddler. There's some
You're going to
stuff.
disappoint a lot of children listening.
I know, but Disney's weird. We all know that. Anyway, so that's a dumb joke, but Werner von Braun, I believe the ADL, or there's like the Saul Wiesenthal Center for finding and bringing Nazis to justice. I can't remember what the actual governing body or whatever it is, but said that if Werner von Braun would be brought to trial today, he died in
77.
77. That they would put, if he was alive today, he'd be put on trial for war crimes, because it was played off for a long time because he became one of us and had a pretty great life. That he wasn't a bad Nazi, and he was just one of those Nazis who kind of had to be a Nazi because he was in Germany and he couldn't not be a Nazi. Well, it turns out that he was in the SS, and that his rocket factory in Germany during World War II was manned by slave labor. And not only that, either weekly or daily reports from people who were the slave labor at his rocket factory, he would have the five slowest factory workers hanged on like the front lawn of the,
Mm.
to kind of motivate, I guess. And that's the guy that we brought over. Literally, there's a stadium in Huntsville, Alabama. That's where he was, and that's where like NASA was kind of like created. And there's a stadium down there that's the Werner von Braun Center. I mean, we lit. Maybe they've changed it since, but for years and years and years and years and years, Werner von Braun was like basically a national hero before this age of like information where like
But if
people
they
could
were going to change it for those reasons, they're probably not now.
what.
Change the name if it's still
Oh,
the name. They're not going to change it now.
but it's crazy. I mean, there is, I can't remember what it's like, it's some sort of convention center or like Coliseum or something like that that it has his name. But he was he was head of NASA. He was our guy that we got through Operation Paperclip, and he was a scumbag.
Well, it
But
goes to show you it never, well, this is that history's written by the victors kind of thing,
absolutely
is you can decide who's bad and who's not so bad. And
right,
just
exactly,
control, not to get back to that, but that was part of what my thesis was about again with the movies. And part
right,
of why the movies were done the way they were done was to make these guys not look so bad, because everybody's not a horrible
right,
Nazi.
because
And it's just the bad Nazis. It's not all the Germans, even that,
right,
it's trying to separate that out and make
yep,
it seem like it was justifiable to
Mhm.
do things for economic means or in a weapons race
Yeah,
for rather than
exactly.
have any sense of morality
Our
because it's not
next
moral, it's not ethical,
our
but it
next
depends on what's going to
enemy
make money or give us an
was
advantage.
the Soviets, and the Soviets had gotten a gang of Nazis to work on their satellites and space program and whatnot and rockets, and they were a little less scrupulous than us.
Yeah,
So to keep up with the Joneses, quote unquote, we had to
right.
steal some Nazis too. Here's my
A
here's
little bit of bad to do greater good
yeah,
is the justification, right?
yep, that's it's always justification. So, but what's really interesting is I believe it was Werner von Braun's personal assistant, this woman. She came out after his death, which coincidentally I had no idea that Werner von Braun had anything to do with Virginia. I just knew you were talking about the false flags and the
Mm.
psyops and whatnot, and this I remembered this part of it. So I just looked it up real quick, but he died in Alexandria, Virginia on June 16th, 1977. That's where this Nazi scumbag finished his life, was in the great Commonwealth of Virginia.
There you go.
But what's interesting is I believe it was his personal assistant, this woman, came out after his death and talked about his deathbed confession and what he laid out supposedly. And I believe this came out in like the 80s. That the government of the United States or the world government or whatever it is, what she said that he said was that first they would use it was in reference to what they would use to control people and kind of keep us scared. And it was that it started off with the Nazis, which I feel like was him kind of shirking responsibility for being a Nazi scumbag. Then it was the Soviets, and then he specifically said before it was as big as it got that they would use the Muslim terrorism as the next thing, and then it would be I can't remember something else, and then it would finally end with a fake alien invasion.
Mm.
That's what the guy who basically is responsible for NASA, who was a Nazi scumbag. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
And who knows if he actually said this or is this just something that she made up? But and I can't remember the whole, Werner von Braun deathbed confession prophecy thing. But you can look it up, and when it came out, there were still several pieces of it that she was dead on the money about. And now we had our real long period of Muslim terrorism. I mean, it still goes on, but the late
But
90s,
it two invading
thousands was
multiple countries
all it
over it is
was.
maybe, well, we'll see what happens with the Iran thing. But
Exactly. But now it really does feel like we are moving into this I mean, we are ripe for, I mean, even
well, you
President,
have to have an existential threat,
yeah, to galvanize a one world government
anything.
was the whole point of it. And you even look at what Ronald Reagan said. I mean, he literally is quoted as saying in a speech, I can't remember what the exact quote was, but the gist of it was, I mean, and he kind of came out and said it, and everybody was like, what is he talking about? But he talks about in this one famous speech, Reagan comes out and says, like, that we would all come together if there was something like a alien invasion or something like that. Like it's a really weird kind of prophetic uh speech from Reagan. It's like right up there with that last, one of those last Kennedy speeches and the Eisenhower speech
Mm.
where it's nuts. But so the guy who created basically is responsible for NASA, who was a Nazi scumbag, said that made this kind of prophecy or whistle blew on his deathbed that at some point in the future, after the Muslim terrorism and the Soviets, that a false flag alien invasion would be the next would be the fine. It kind of seemed it was like his last point, and it was like the final thing to
Where
finally
else could you go?
centralize government
Mm.
into a one world kind of new world order type thing. So
Yeah.
sorry, I hijacked that.
No,
So
it's quite all right. It's a good way to kind of wrap it up, I suppose. Well, the only other thing I was thinking about was like this drone thing. And
yeah,
I thought about this after you saw the thing about the Ukrainian drone attack on the Russian bombers that apparently surprised them so much, where the Ukrainians used these
well, yes,
super long range and shredded up that airfield and destroyed all these Russian heavy bombers. And I saw somebody wrote an op-ed the other day about this was something he had been telling people in the government they had to pay attention to when all those drones were swarming around Jersey
right.
and New York and Virginia Beach was what if somebody had that same capability and could do that to your largest naval base in the world, for example.
Or your
Here's the thought.
CIA bases, or the FBI base, or the Pentagon. I mean,
So
we are
if
in
they
the
could do that with
sweet
drones,
spot, so to speak.
if they could do that to the Russians with drones, and these other things that people are seeing in the military are so far more capable than the drones,
Mm-hmm.
but people weren't aware that there were drones like that yet. You
Right.
see where I'm going with this? What does that mean for what you're trying to cover up or potentially made? And then if you potentially made it, the United States is really aggressive. We always paint ourselves as the defensive ones, but
Right.
we're super aggressive. We have been since the very beginning. It would not track with American thinking and policy to have something that was that much more capable than a cluster of drones that people don't know what they are and not use it to go ahead and take out your Soviet assets, your Chinese assets, and say, hey,
Except
game over.
it,
We've got it. We just act like we
right.
don't have it.
But
And then we'll call
except
it UFOs, but it's actually technology we developed. And then let people see it, say it's not real, and then not use it when you've built
except
it.
for
It makes
we're
zero
doing pretty
sense.
good without it, and we can kind of keep that ace in the hole. That's
Well,
my
what
theory
makes you
on
think
it.
we're doing pretty good without it, though? Because, I
Hey,
mean,
we since Pearl Harbor, we haven't had I guess 9/11, but the government did that.
we had to
Um,
leave Iraq because we can't handle guys that use handwritten notes and
I
improvised
don't,
explosives, and the same in
I know,
Afghanistan. We
but
can't fight guys on the
I
ground
think
in the
half of
mountains.
that's political. Why we go in, why we move out, why we go in here and we don't go in there, and why we move in here. I
But
mean,
if you had
who
that
knows?
technology, I just feel like you'd be able to game over for everybody.
I mean,
You
but
do what
what
we
was
say
that thing
now.
in Trump's first presidency where he just dropped that like crazy bomb? Remember that?
What
That
kind of
seemed
crazy
pretty.
bomb? Like
I don't
something he
remember.
said, or like an actual
It
bomb?
was a bomb.
I don't remember
It
that.
was some, yeah, it was in the first in his first term. He flew over somewhere and dropped a
With the
bomb.
drone?
No, I don't think it was with, no, it wasn't with a
I don't know.
drone.
Because I mean, we've done
I was
that a
saying,
bunch of
I think
times, but those are
we're
like pretty
I
normal
think that
drones.
our military and our government knows that we've got technology that is probably behind what we really have that's effective enough to take care of. You know what I mean? You have to believe that we are doing our utmost everywhere that we are at to believe that we wouldn't keep an ace in the hole. And I don't for 1 second believe. I mean, how many
I
special
agree with
forces
you, but
guys have to come out and go, we could have finished that conflict in 20 minutes
yeah.
with like 12 guys.
I agree with what you're saying, but I'm wondering if your ace in the hole could be. This is like talking about your ace in the hole, but then a card that's not even a known card in a known deck in a known game.
For sure.
That it would be so far beyond like, oh yeah, we got drones better than that, and we can do more than that tenfold. But this thing we're talking about that these guys are talking about exists, or now saying also doesn't exist. It exists. No, it doesn't exist. The
What do you
program's there. It's not
Okay,
there.
so I think
That technology is so far beyond that. It would be like, wow. I
I
mean,
think a good way to finish this up.
why not incrementally? Why would you just incrementally keep using stuff that's actually archaic by comparison to make it look like that's your newest ace in the hole?
Because people have nukes.
Hmm.
And I think if
But with
we
this stuff,
push
wouldn't you
the,
just be able to not
I mean,
take care of
because
the nukes?
you, what you'd be suggesting is that our final goal is to be the world ruler, right? Which I don't know that that's that far off, but
It would track.
I it would. I do believe no matter what you've got, if you piss off the whole world all at once, you become the target of the whole world. And I just don't know that even with what we may have, if all this stuff is ours, even with stuff fails and humans are humans and they screw up, like I just feel like if we showed our hand, to continue with the poker analogy,
Hmm.
if we showed our hand too early and started using all this wacky stuff to take over the world, I still think that we're vulnerable.
Mm.
I think that somebody somewhere, like if all of a sudden all the enemy nukes and our ally nukes all of a sudden turn and point at us, I don't know how many tic tacs it would take, or if we have enough to finish the mission of being
Mm.
the world
It's a possibility.
dominators. And I think they probably take, if it all is ours, they would take that into account. Like we got to be incremental about this. I mean, it's only so incremental. I mean, our country is how old?
Almost 250. We're getting to the
250
250
in
next year.
comparison, and we were 250 years old, and we went from like being a colony of a little island. I
Mm.
mean, they were an empire at the time, but a colony to kind of being the world power. Like
Pretty quick.
as soon as we were like, okay, we're our own thing, and we're the shit. So don't
Yeah.
mess with us. You know what I mean? Um, but here in the, pretty quickly, 250 years in comparison to other world empires, it took a little while for some of these places to get up off the ground.
Yeah, that's true.
So
And
we're
then
doing it pretty quick.
we've done a pretty good job of holding a lot of other places in that
Yeah.
spot too, like not getting anywhere close to.
Yeah. I mean, and again, think about it. Attacks on US soil have been, other than 9/11, we've held anything like that off
Yeah, I
except
mean that
for
was
Pearl
the
Harbor. And if we want to,
Pearl Harbor. I think when the Japanese got onto some of the Aleutian Islands, which is that chain that sticks off Alaska, was the
right.
last time we had foreign troops
And
on.
really, Pearl Harbor, we're on a conspiracy show here.
Well,
I
I
mean,
want
there
that
is
too.
a whole lot of evidence to suggest that we knew it was going to happen and let it happen so that we would have an excuse to
Yeah.
jump in there.
Well, I'm going to end on this, and I think there's one more. This is not a lengthy thing, but I think I'm curious when this Age of Disclosure film finally comes out on a streaming platform and we can watch it. I'm really curious to hear what else Christopher Mellon has to say when he talks about people are not ready for the truth, because another possibility I think is distinctly true. What could be either way, whether that's extraterrestrial technology
Mm-hmm.
or it's technology somebody's got that is way ahead of what we've got. Either one is true,
Or it's ours.
or it's ours. I think either way,
I think all three of those options we're not ready for.
I think that's what he means when he talks about, well, that's obviously what he means when he talks about people are not ready for the truth. But I think the problem with that is, can you imagine, let's say we wake up tomorrow and no bullshit, government's like, hey, we've unfortunately got to tell you guys, like, yes, this is extraterrestrial. Our nukes, our stealth thing, nothing that we have could possibly
Null and
bother
void.
these guys. You immediately reduce humans
Oh,
to a much lower
primitive,
form on the pecking
crazy.
order.
We think things in LA right now are crazy.
And that the
It's
fear that would
yeah.
spread economically, people running each other over, trying to get out of town,
There
like
wouldn't
all
have to
this
be a
kind of stuff
there
would
wouldn't
just
have to
be
be a nuclear
absolute and
holocaust.
utter
It would be the
chaos.
exact same reaction.
Right.
Nothing could happen. Just the information that it's possible that we could be wiped off or subjugated by an alien race
Even if
or
they were not aggressive and trying to bother us, it would simply demonstrate
yeah,
the arrogance that we of a species have as far as what we are and what we can do is insane. I mean, what
yeah.
people think is important. Just look at social
Well,
media or anything else, and how important is any of that once you know something like that is the case? It also throws into question so much about, I mean, probably the majority of the population is religious, wouldn't you say? And is firmly rooted
yeah,
in some sort of religious belief, and
yeah,
it throws all that into question.
yeah.
Imagine just like the absolute and utter chaos that would
Well,
come out of people actually knowing
and
something like
that's
that. It's not
conspiratorially.
even conceivable.
Yeah, well, and conspiratorially, that is the idea. That is one of the theories and the ideas behind it. Is that again to galvanize, and this starts feeding into some of the Book of Revelation um, prophecies and whatnot. Is that there will be in the Book of Revelation? It does talk about there will be a one world religion, and if some outside force, alien or something like that, um, comes in and saves us from something, or has the potential to kill the whole planet, but by force they go, okay, now we're your rulers and we're going to make everything better. It kind of feeds into the Book of Revelation kind of prophecies that there will be an antichrist or a force that comes in and everything's great for a long time, and then there's this one world religion. You know what I mean? Like they could use that as the same thing. You present the problem and then you fix it with
Mhm.
this all-knowing, all-powerful force. One thing I was going to say, and I thought that'd be a good way to end and kind of leave people with a little bit of hope, and that's that if it is ours, I did listen to a couple high ranking, I don't know if they were generals or something. They were high up in the military, smart, read in, like high access people on a couple different interviews. And the thing that stuck out to me is both of these guys, they were separate. I can't remember who they were now, but they both kind of inferred the same idea, and that's that the US military is set up in such a way that it it's not set up in a way where there are fail safes for coup type situations, and that the way the U.S. military on all levels is set up, that if some faction, and that's all it can really be, because the military is so compartmentalized rank wise and department wise, that the only way that something like this could be ours and that most of everybody else doesn't know about it and keep it a secret is that once one section is doing this thing. And basically what they inferred was that if a coup or a mass extinction kind of like thing was about to happen, that there are enough patriotic sergeants, colonels, generals who are going to take action and have the access to the weapons to defend. Um and that's kind of the way the military was set up to sort of be able to go, no, 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 you're acting unbecoming of your rank and office. And so, it would take the compartmentalization that they've done to our government and our military, which enables them to have these big secrets and these secret weapons and these psyops and quiet departments and things like that, also is what could bite them in the ass later. Because
Yeah.
you think about the amount of Marine grunts, out there who are badass dudes, you know, and army grunts and navy guys who are going to go not not on my watch. You're not
Yeah.
my family lives you know
Yeah.
off base or whatever. I always think about that when they say Trump's going to start a coup, or the Democrats are going to take over the government and make us socialists, or Trump's going to be the new dictator. I always think back to those guys going, we're not set up like that, man. We're
Mm.
not set up the way they were in Nazi Germany in the same way. Like we're not set up to where we could be taken over that easily. I guess anything's possible.
Well, hopefully we don't have to find out.
Bro, all this shit is coming to some sort of crescendo. And again, I always say, man,
Well, you might remember, not to
something's
get down
gnarly
another
is gonna
road. I
happen.
just whacked my nose into this
Yeah, you
microphone.
did.
But we talked about this probably at Bonuts once, but the historical precedent for it's not precisely 100 years, but around every 100 years you have some sort of catastrophic
Mm-hmm.
conflict, whether that's um, French Revolution
Mm-hmm. World
and how that
War.
altered things, World War II.
Mm-hmm.
You have these like you had French Revolution, Russian Revolution. Those two big events led to those or were parts
Yeah.
of those other
We're
things, and
due
that
for a big mix
we're
up.
due for a massive.
Yeah. Shake up.
And the people always say, "Well, that won't happen again, or that couldn't happen," and then lo and behold, it does.
It
You
always
know, so
does.
somebody thinking there couldn't be another World War II size catastrophe is like fucking idiot. But
Yeah, I mean, we're flirting with it right now,
so
daily, messing with
yeah,
whatever's going on with Iran and China,
yeah. I mean, it's
China,
and
China.
obviously Russia, Ukraine, all that stuff. You
Yeah,
know,
dude, we're flirting with
it's
it.
one hell of a powder keg
Yeah,
right
we're
now,
walking. I mean, as much as what
and
was
that's not even
going,
talking about the. Again, we're gonna get down
the
a big tangent.
Australians,
The ICE
God knows what they're
protests. I
doing
mean,
over
there's
there.
your
They're so far
internal.
up underneath the. We don't know what's happening in
Well, and all the
Australia.
ice protests and all that stuff. I mean, you've got
Lasers on sharks.
yeah lasers on sharks. Yeah,
Australians, they do it.
got lasers on our sharks.
Lasers on
I
sharks.
mean, the bloody thing was moving 200 miles an hour under the water, but we got
Great whites.
lasers on the sharks to take care of them, boys.
I can't do an Australian accent unless I yell everything. It has to be super loud, and everything is a question. Right?
Yeah.
Sharks?
Oh boy! All
All
right.
right. Well, I think
Well,
that's as good a place to end a UFO talk with Australian laser sharks.
why not?
That's a great name for a band.
It is a great thing for a band. Oh,
At least an
boy,
album.
the Australian.
Australian laser sharks, bro.
Uh,
What's up, Cleveland? We are Australian laser sharks. Thank you. Good night. All right.
So,
I think that's a good
all
place
right,
to end
on
it.
that,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good night.